Good evening, my fellow Reisende. Welcome back to Egil's Saga. Egil told his companions that he wanted to continue on his journey and not wait any longer. Thorfinn offered to accompany Egil through the forest with his son Helgi, who was a brave lad. They told him they were certain Armand Beard had sent the 6 men to waylay them in the forest, and that there were likely to be more ambushes if the first failed. Thorfinn and 3 others offered to go with them. Then Egil spoke a verse. You know, if I take 4 men, 6 will not manage to swap bloody blows the battle god's shield piercer with me. And if I have 8 men, no 12 will strike fear into the dark-browed man's heart when the swords clash. Thorfinn and his men decided to go to the forest with Egil, so there were 8 of them in all. When they came to the ambush, they saw some people there. Armin's 6 farmhands were lying in ambush, but when they saw 8 men approaching, they did not think they had any chance against them, and stole away to the forest. When Egil and his men reached the spot where the spies had been, they could tell that danger was lurking. Egil told Thorfinn and his men to go back, but they wanted to go on. Egil refused and insisted that they go home, so in the end they did. They set off for home again while Egil and his 3 men continued their journey. As the day wore on, Egil and his men noticed 6 men in the woods, and guessed that they were Armin's farmhands. The spies jumped out and attacked them, but Egil fought back. When they clashed, Egil killed 2 of the attackers, and the rest ran back into the forest. Then Egil and his men proceeded on their way, and nothing else happened until they emerged from the forest and spent the night on a nearby farm with a farmer named Alf, who was nicknamed Alf the Wealthy. He was an old, wealthy man, but so unsociable that he could only bear having a few people working for him on the farm. Egil received a warm welcome there, and Alf was talkative to him. Egil asked him many things, and he answered them all. They talked mainly about the Earl and the envoys of the King of Norway, who had gone out to the east to collect tribute. From what Alf said, he was no friend of the Earl's. Early the next morning, Egil and his companions prepared to leave. As a parting gift, Egil gave Alf a fur coat, which he accepted thankfully. I can have it made into a fur cape, he said, as he invited Egil to visit him again on his way back. They parted good friends, and Egil continued on his way. In the evening, he reached Earl Arnvind's company and was well received there. He and his companions were given seats next to the head of the table. After staying there for the night, Egil and his companions told the Earl of their errand and the king's message, saying he wanted all the tribute from Varmland that had gone unpaid since Arnvind was appointed to rule there. The Earl told them he had already paid all the tribute to the king's envoys. I don't know what they did with it after that, whether they handed it over to the king or ran away with it to another country. Since you are carrying genuine tokens to prove the king sent you, I will pay all the tribute he is entitled to and hand it over to you. But I won't be held responsible for the way you look after it. Egil and his men stayed there for some while, and before they left, the Earl paid the tribute over to them. Some of it was in silver and the rest in furs. After Egil and his men had made their preparations to leave, they set off. When they parted, Egil told the Earl, We will give the king the tribute we have received from you, but you ought to realize that this is much less money than the king lays claim to here, and that's not counting the fact that he feels you should pay compensation for the lives of his envoys, because people are saying you had them killed. The Earl said this rumor was untrue, and they parted. Once Egil had left, the Earl called in 2 brothers, both of them named Ulf. He said to them, That big man Egil, who is around here for a while, I think it will cause us a lot of trouble if he makes it back to the king. I can imagine the impression he will give about me to the king, judging from the accusations you throw around here about executing the king's men. You go after them and kill them all to stop them spreading such slander to the king. My advice is to ambush them in Eideskog. Take enough men with you to be sure that none of them get away, and that you do not suffer any injuries at their hands. The brothers got ready to leave, taking 30 men with them. They entered the forest, where they were familiar with every trail and kept watch for Egil's movements. There were 2 routes through the forest. The shorter one involved crossing a ridge that had steep slopes and a narrow track over the top. The other route was to go around the ridge where there were large marshes covered by felled logs to cross by, with a single track over them too. 15 men sat in ambush on each route. Egil proceeded until he reached Alf's farm, where he stayed for the night and was well looked after. The next morning he got up before daybreak and prepared to leave. Alf came over to them when they were having breakfast. "You're making an early start, Egil," he said, "but I wouldn't advise you to rush your journey. Be careful, because I expect people to be waiting in ambush for you in the forest. I do not have any men who would be any help to send with you, but I want to invite you to stay here with me until I can tell you it's safe to go through the forest." "It's nothing but nonsense to claim that we will be ambushed," Egil replied. "I will go on my way as I planned." Egil and his men made preparations to leave, but Alf tried to discourage him and told him to come back if he noticed tracks on the path, saying that no one had come back to the forest from the east since Egil went there, unless the people that I expect will be looking for you have been there. "How many of them do you think there are, assuming what you say is right?" asked Egil. "We're not at their mercy, even if they outnumber us by a few men." "I went over near the forest with my farmhand," said Alf, "and we came across human tracks that extended into the forest. There must have been a lot of them together. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go there yourself and take a look at the tracks. But come back here if you think what I've told you is right." Egil went on his way, and when the party reached the road through the forest, they saw tracks left by both men and horses. Egil's companions said they wanted to turn back. "We will go on," Egil said. "It doesn't surprise me that people have been traveling through Eideskog, because it's the route everyone takes." They set off again, and the tracks continued, many of them until they reached a fork in the road where the tracks also split up into two equal groups. "It looks as though Alf may have been telling the truth," said Egil. "Let us be prepared to expect an encounter." Egil and his men took off their cloaks and all their loose clothing and put them on the sleighs. He had taken along a long bast rope in his sleigh, since it was the custom on longer journeys to have a spare rope in case the reins needed mending. Then he took a huge slab of rock and placed it against his chest and stomach, then strapped it tight with the rope, winding it around his body all the way up to his shoulders. Eideskog is heavily wooded right up to the settlements on either side of it, but deep inside it are bushes and brushwood, and in some places no trees at all. Egil and his men took the shorter route that lay over the ridge. They were all carrying shields and wearing helmets, and had axes and spears as well. Egil led the way. The ridge was wooded at its foot, but the slopes up to the bluff were bare of trees. When they were on the bluff, 7 men leapt out of the trees and up the cliff after them, shooting arrows at them. Egil and his men turned around and blocked the whole path. Other men came down at them from the top of the ridge and threw rocks at them from above, which was much more dangerous. Egil told them, "You go and seek shelter at the foot of the bluff and protect yourselves as best you can, while I'll take a look on top." They did so, and when Egil reached the top of the bluff, there were 8 men waiting there, who all attacked him at once. Without describing the blows, their clash ended with Egil killing them all. Then he went up to the edge of the bluff and hurled down rocks that were impossible to fend off. 3 of the Varmlanders were left dead, while 4 escaped into the forest, hurt and bruised. After that, Egil and his men returned to their horses and continued until they had crossed the ridge. The Varmlanders who had escaped tipped off their companions who were by the marshes. They headed along the lower path and emerged on the track in front of Egil and his men. One of the brothers, who were both named Ulf, said to his men, "Now we have to devise a scheme and arrange things to prevent them running away. The route here skirts the ridge, and there's a cliff above it where the marsh extends up to it. The path there is no wider than a single track. Some of us should go around the ridge and face them if they try to move forwards, and the rest should hide here in the forest and jump out behind them when they come past. We will make sure that no one gets away." They did as Ulf said. Ulf went around the cliff, taking 10 men with him. Egil and his men went on their way, unaware of this plan, until they reached the single track, where they were attacked from behind by 9 armed men. When Egil and his men fought back and defended themselves, others rushed up who had been in the front of the ridge. Seeing this, Egil turned to face them. In a few quick blows he killed some of them, and the rest retreated to where the ground was more level. Egil pursued them. Ulf died there, and in the end Egil killed 11 men by himself. Then he pressed on to where his companions were holding 8 men at bay on the path. Men were wounded on both sides. When Egil arrived, the Varmlanders fled at once into the nearby forest. 5 of them escaped, all severely wounded, and 3 were killed on the spot. Egil received many wounds, but none of them serious. They went on their way, and Egil tended his companions' wounds, none of which was fatal. Then they got on their sleighs and rode for the rest of the day. The Varmlanders, who managed to escape, took their horses and struggled back from the forest to the settlement in the east, where their wounds were tended to. There they got some men to go and see the Earl and tell him about their misfortunes. They reported that both brothers named Ulf were dead, and 25 men in all. Only 5 escaped with their lives, all of them wounded or injured. The Earl asked about Egil and his men. "We have no idea how many of them were wounded," they replied. "They attacked us with great bravery. When there were 8 of us and 4 of them, we fled. 5 of us made it to the forest and the other 3 died. And as far as we could see, Egil and his men hadn't taken a scratch." The Earl said their expedition had turned out the worst possible way. "I could have put up with you suffering heavy losses if you had killed the Norwegians," he said. "But now, when they go west of the forest and tell this news to the King of Norway, we can expect the harshest treatment imaginable from him." Egil continued his journey until he emerged on the western side of the forest. He and his men went to Thorfinn at night, and there were warmly welcomed. Egil and his companions had their wounds dressed there, and they stayed for several nights. By then, Thorfinn's daughter Helga was back on her feet, cured of her ailment, and she and everybody else thanked Egil for that. The travellers rested their horses at the farm as well. The man who had carved runes for Helga lived close by. It transpired that he had asked her for her hand in marriage, but Thorfinn had refused him. Then the farmer's son had tried to seduce her, but she did not want him. After that he pretended to carve love runes to her, but did not know how to, and what he carved caused sickness instead. When Egil was ready to leave, Thorfinn and his sons accompanied him along the trail. There were 10 or 12 of them in all. They travelled together all day as a precaution against Armund and his men. When word spread that Egil and his men had fought against overwhelming odds and won, Armund realized there was no hope that he might be able to put up a fight against him, so he stayed at home with all his men. Egil and Thorfinn exchanged gifts when they parted and promised each other friendship. Then Egil and his men continued on their way, and nothing happened on the journey until they reached Thorstein. Their wounds had healed by then. Egil stayed there until spring. Thorstein sent envoys to King Hakon to deliver the tribute that Egil had collected in Varmland, and when they saw the king and handed it over, they told him what happened on the expedition. The king realized then that his suspicions were true, and Earl Arnvid had killed the 2 teams of envoys that he had sent to the east. The king told Thorstein he would be allowed to stay in Norway and be reconciled with him. Then the envoys went home. When they returned, they told him that the king was pleased with the expedition and had promised Thorstein reconciliation and friendship. King Hakon travelled to Vik in the summer, and east from there to Varmland with a large army. Arnvid fled from him, while the king exacted heavy levies from the farmers he considered to have wronged him, as reported by the collections of the tribute. He appointed another earl and took hostages from him and the farmers. On this voyage, King Hakon travelled wildly in Västergotland, and brought it under his rule, as is described in his saga and mentioned in the poems that have been composed about him. It is also said he went to Denmark and raided many places. He disabled 12 Danish ships, with just 2 of his own, granted his nephew Tryggvi Olafsson the title of king, and made him ruler of Vik in the east. Egil made his trading vessel ready and took on a crew, and as a parting gift he gave Thorstein the longship that he had brought from Denmark that autumn. Thorstein presented Egil with fine gifts, and they promised each other great friendship. Egil sent messengers to his kinsman Thor at Aurland, granting him authority to manage the lands Egil owned in Sognafjord and Hordaland, and asking him to sell them if buyers could be found. When Egil and his men were ready to make their journey and a fair wind got up, they sailed out to Vik and along the coast of Norway, then out to sea for Iceland. they had a fairly smooth journey and arrived in Borgafjord. Egil took his ship along the fjord to anchor it close to his farm, and had his cargo taken home, and the ship pulled up. Egil went home to his farm, and everyone was pleased to see him, and he stayed there for the winter. By the time Egil returned from his voyage, the district was completely settled. All the original settlers had died by then, and their sons or grandsons were living in the district. Ketilgufa, Steam, came to Iceland when it was by and large settled. He spent the first winter at Gufaskalar on Romsdalsnes. Ketil had sailed over from Ireland and brought many Irish slaves with him. Since all the land on Romsdalsnes were settled by that time, Ketil moved away to Ness and spent his second winter at Gufunes, but found nowhere to make his home. Then he went into Borgafjord and stayed for the third winter at the place now called Gufaskalar, keeping a ship on the river Gufua, which comes down from the mountains there. Thord Lambason was living at Lambastaðr by then. He was married and had a son called Lambi, who was fully grown by this time and big and strong for his age. In the summer, when everyone rode off to the Thing, Lambi did so too. By then, Ketil had moved west to Breidafjord to look for a place to live. Ketil's slaves ran away and came upon Thord at Lambastaðr by night. They set fire to the houses, burning Thord and all his farmhands inside, broke into his sheds, and brought all the cattle and goods outside. They rounded up the horses, loaded the booty onto them, and rode out to Alfdanes. That morning, around sunrise, Lambi returned home, having seen the flames during the night. There were several men with him. He rode off at once to search for the slaves, and people from other farms joined him. When the slaves saw that they were being pursued, they discarded their booty and headed for shelter. Some ran to Mirar, and others toward the sea until they reached a fjord. Lambi and his men pursued them and killed the slave called Kori at the place now known as Goranes. Skorri, Thormand, and Svart dived into the sea and swam away from land. Lambi and his men looked around for some boats and rowed after them. They found Skorri on Skorri Island, where they killed him, then rowed out to a skerry where they killed Thormund, which has been called Thormasker, meaning Thormundskerry, ever since. They caught other slaves at places that are also named after them now. Lambi lived at Lambastaðr after this and became a worthy farmer. He was a man of great might, but not a troublemaker. Ketilsteam went west to Breidafjord and settled in Thorskafjord. Gufudal Valley and Gufafjord named after him. He married Ir, the daughter of Geimer Darkskin, and they had a son called Vali. There is a man named Grim, the son of Sverting, and he lived at Mossfell, at the foot of the moor called Heidi. He was a wealthy and of good family. His half-sister was Ranveig, wife of Thorod the Godi from Ulfus, and their son was Skafti the law-speaker. Grim also became law-speaker later. He asked to marry Egil's niece and foster-daughter Thordis, the daughter of Thorolf. Egil loved Thordis no less dearly than his own children. She was a very attractive woman. Since Egil knew that Grim was a man of good birth and this was a good match, the marriage was settled. When Thordis married Grim, Egil handed over the inheritance her father had left to her. She went to Grim's farm and they lived at Mossfell for a long time. Tack skal du ha, and see you next time. Ha det.